Hello, everyone. This is Charles Walter Buntjer coming to you from San Francisco. I'm celebrating living here 62 years. I lived in Illinois for 23 years. And I just had my 85th birthday this year in Iceland, of all places. Now, I want to talk about what happened to me when I was 4 years old and almost died because of appendicitis. My neighbor brought me these flowers, and they kind of reminded me of what the wake might have looked like with the flowers. So anyway, fasten your seatbelts. It's going to be an interesting ride. My birthday was in February in 1944, and a few months later, March, April, I'm not sure, I got up and looked out in the front yard, and there was my mother, Edna, and my sister, Yvonne, and they had clotheslines strung up all over, fast to the house and to the trees and to the fence, and they had all kinds of rugs and quilts and everything on these lines, and they had these beaters. They looked like a tennis racket, but they were metal rods, and they were beating the crap out of those rugs, especially. They'd been in the floor for a year. Now, we didn't get a vacuum until maybe 47, 48. It was an Electrolux, I believe, a canister style. So that certainly helped my mother do housework besides working on the farm. So I, of course, went out and stood behind one of the rugs and looked at my sister, and I went, "Nya, nya, nya." And of course, she's 12 years old, 8 years older than I am, and she looks at me and gives me the evil look. And then I give her the evil look, "Nya, nya." And then, of course, off she goes after me, and I'm running around screaming, and she's chasing me all over, around and around, and our mother got very irritated, and she said, "What is wrong with you two? We've got all this work to do." She said, "Stop screwing around." So suddenly, my mother hears this terrible scream, and she thinks my sister has really done me in. She comes flying around the rugs, and she says to her, "What do you think you're doing to him?" Because she used to get me on the ground and sit on my stomach and hold my arms up like this, and then she would go, "Nah, nah, nah, nah. I'm going to spit in your face." Or then she'd say, "All right," she says, "I'm going to tickle you." Well, I'm screaming and crying, and my mother says, "What's happening?" And Yvonne says, "I don't know. I was chasing him, and he suddenly fell down and is crying." And I was in a fetal position, so they picked me up and put me on the day bed next to the kitchen. I cried all day and all night, and they weren't sure what to do, so they finally decided they should take me to the doctor. So the next day, off we went to Pecatonica to the local doctor, and he fiddled around for a while, and he poked me in my stomach, and I screamed and cried, and then he just shook his head and he said, "Nah, it's nothing, it's just stomach flu. Give him some castor oil or whatever, and just put him to bed, and he'll be okay in a couple of days, tough luck." So they said, "Oh, that's good to know." So off we went back to the farm. They put me on the day bed, and I cried all day and all night. And the next morning, they came in to check on me after milking the cows, and I was comatose. I was just out of it. They didn't know what to do, so they decided they had to take me to Freeport because there was a big hospital there run by the Catholics, and they bundled me all up, put me in the back of the car, and off we went to Freeport. We got to Freeport, and the doctors there were really mad. They took us into the emergency ward, and they said, "What was wrong with my parents?" And they said, "Well, what do you mean?" And they said, "He's got appendicitis." They said, "This is horrible. You should have come in the day it happened." They said, "Well, they went to Pecatonica," and the doctors there said, "Yeah, right." And I said, the country doctor, all he did was poke him and didn't even really investigate what was wrong. So they said, "You should have brought him in right away." Well, my parents didn't know any better than that. I mean, how would you know that? You think the doctor told you you had stomach flu. but it was appendicitis. So they took me into the operating room, and I was 4 years old, as I said, very small, and they were out 4 or 5 hours and came back, and they said they did an incision in my side that was about 4 inches long, and I had infection inside because it was burst appendix, and they had to take all my organs and move them around and wash everything out and hope for the best because there was infection all over it. They said it was green bile, and they didn't know if I was going to live or not. So of course my parents and my sister were devastated. A couple of days went by and I was still unconscious. I hadn't come out of it yet. And I was starting to turn a little gray, my skin, I was told. So they really were upset. One of the young doctors said that he had a friend who was working in Chicago at a large hospital, and he would contact him and see if there was anything they knew that they could do that we could have done at Freeport. The young doctor in Chicago said they had just gotten penicillin in, the vaccine, and they said it was only a couple of years that it was actually in use. And Chicago, as I said, had just gotten it in, and he said what he would do is get in the car and drive the 90, 100 miles to Freeport with the vaccine and see if that could help. And it was really interesting because vaccine and penicillin hadn't been used until the last couple of years. When I was born, they tested it in the South Pacific, and they found out that it was a wonder drug. They came back with the drugs and they started giving them to me, and I didn't recover. I just laid there, and a day went by, 2 days went by, and a third day, and the doctors came in and they told my parents and my sister that I probably wasn't going to make it. And a nun came in because she'd been helping out and looking over me, and a nurse, and they were all having a trauma, and they said they couldn't give me any more penicillin. And then a priest came in and he said, could he give me last rites? And everybody said, well, we're not Catholics, but yeah, it can't hurt. So he's standing over me, and they said that my skin was even darker. And he's chanting away and swinging his beads around, and suddenly my eyes flew open. What? What's happening? What's going on? Why is this man on top of me shaking those beads and stuff? Ugh. So anyway, everybody said, hallelujah, hallelujah. It's a miracle. Chuck's alive. Well, they didn't know if it was because the priest scared me and woke me up or if it was the penicillin, but they did figure it was the penicillin. But anyway, I started to feel better, but I couldn't walk for over, 5 or 6 weeks. And the first month, they put me in a wheelchair, and the nurse would push me all around. And if she didn't, then the nun would push me around, and I was a little spark of enjoyment for everybody because I got to know everybody and chit-chatted with everybody. And then they decided I should go home, and my parents put me in the main bedroom on the first floor, and they had to go out and work all day on the fields, and plus doing the cattle and the pigs and chickens and all that sort of stuff, chores. And my sister was in school, so they put me in bed and put a jar there for me to pee in, and food and drinks and magazines and all this and that. And so I had to do that for a couple more weeks. But I did have an incident when I was there in bed. A few days went by, and I decided I had to get out because I was bored and I wanted to do something. So I got my feet on the floor and went to stand up, and I slid on the floor and plopped down there and laid there for about 3 hours or more. And my parents came in, and did I get it? I was scolded in no uncertain terms because they were worried that maybe I had broken the stitches. And they managed to lift me up and get me back in bed and told me to shape up or else. So much for that. But within a couple of weeks, I was feeling much better, and I managed to start walking around again. And here you can see me with my dog Buster and my cats, and just having a wonderful time. And my life was taken off again, just like it was before I had this surgery. I had a wonderful life, and life was just going to get better again in the future. So I hope you enjoyed this story and how close I was to death. And I didn't need these flowers for the wake. Isn't that a good thing to know? So I hope you enjoyed this YouTube video. You take care.